Okay, so real quickly, TopCoder is, at its very core, it's a community of now approaching 470,000 members from around the world. It's comprised of software developers, algorithmists, and front-end digital design creatives. At a very macro level, we host competitions. Some might call it crowdsourcing, some might call it open innovation, but we host atomized competitions on our enterprise open innovation platform, and we deliver best-in-breed digital assets, and we transfer the IP back to our clients. It's a shift in how assets are being created and how digital innovation is happening. And of course, we can give you tons more information about who TopCoder is and why we're here. But I do want to get towards the focus of today's call, which is of course legacy modernization, how we approach that through open innovation, which is really quite interesting. With that said, we'll dive into the modernization portion of it, and I'll turn it over to Mike Lydon, CTO of TopCoder, to take you through this incredible quote and slide.
Well, thanks, Clinton. I think this is a great quote, and it's obviously a little bit tongue-in-cheek because the implications I don't think Ernest was necessarily implying that nobody's been thinking up until this point, but really thinking differently is the key. And so, when the money's flowing, people have a tough time thinking innovatively and changing the way that they're thinking because it's status quo. But when money dries up, we have the current fiscal climate, especially in the government, at the federal government level. Everyone's trying to think of ways that they can get, at the very least, things that they need to get done with less money. And so it causes everybody to think about, all right, what are some new ways out there? What are some innovative ways out there? And with with the TopCoder process, using contests and challenges, traditionally people don't think of contests and challenges as a way to tackle, especially something like a legacy modernization project. People are thinking of contests and challenges as a way to come up with solutions to large problems, solving a disease, or getting a rocket efficiently into orbit. But contests and challenges can be utilized if done properly with the correct workflow for tackling traditional system builds, like modernizing a system, and it's better and it's cheaper, and we're going to walk you through some of those examples as to why that's the case.
Great, thank you for that color there, Mike. So we're looking at this, and Andy, if you want to hop in here. So the elements of why it's so tricky will pop up one by one here. But can you give the audience a sense of, at the start, when you're looking at a modernization project, well, why is it so darn complex?
Sure, Clinton, I'd be happy to. So modernization means different things to different people, but for purposes of this conversation, we're saying old and or really tricky and entrenched and into everything, and converting it into something that is well documented and designed with modern techniques and modern supportable languages. There are some things that characterize legacy systems and legacy modernization that any contractor or consulting firm or company that's going through it is used to, and they are what they are. Sometimes they look like something that we wish weren't the case, but every enterprise has problems like this when they go through a modernization effort. So you can expect a lack of documentation. You can expect to see that there be lots of patchwork in code as you continue to support your really expensive, extremely important, and if it was well designed to begin with, probably pretty fast mainframe system or existing app. You'll encounter a lot of workarounds. So where a business process has been entrenched to serve the computer in some cases, and so you'll have procedural workarounds with literally couriers moving paper from one place to another, and there'll be computer workarounds. Trying to use a process B, which was intended for task C, to fill in a hole in task A. There'll be a limited knowledge of technologies through attrition and handoff, as documentation doesn't keep up with the state of the application. And you can also expect to find just a hard time staffing this. So sometimes this last item is in and of itself the reason that modernization finally starts on an existing app. In one example of a system we're aware of, one of the main reasons that the organization is looking at modernization is because the average age of the people supporting the the app is around 66. So another thing you can expect to find is that there are probably different code structures in place. So what do you do when you have a problem as entrenched as this with all of these different characteristics? And above all, how do you use a crowd to handle it? We're familiar hearing about challenges used in the news today for launching rockets and finding new drugs and folding proteins and things like that. But what if you have to do a lot of constituent tasks en route to the big show? This is the reality for most of application development, but also above all, for modernization and legacy application reengineering. And the TopCoder process is especially useful for meeting these goals. So, for example, decompose and organize a legacy code. Just start by understanding it's there. If it's going to take you several months to modernize the code anyway, this provides you with instant data and documentation to support your current operations. You can test assumptions on each step of the way about what you know of the existing app and what you would like the new one to do. Because you're breaking contests down into iterations and because you have specific contests for specific steps in the SDLC, you won't have to wait for the big bang. You'll be able to monitor and manage as you go. This third bullet is especially important. It's not terribly useful to completely redesign a new approach without knowing what was wrong with the old approach. So one way of, one particularly helpful ancillary benefit of an iterative approach is that you're able to merge your business goal, think, and your proposed approach and going through your discovery all at the same time. So as you're working through a workaround, you might think, well, why does this workaround exist? Let's not just install a new panel that does this more efficiently in the new app. Let's think about why this workaround is here at all. And you might find that there's a process of procedural change that should go. And the rest of these are pretty common steps for any project, of course, just working through compliance. It's an opportunity to bring a system up to a new standard or new regulation compliance. And the last one is especially interesting because this is, as you're organizing and reorganizing a legacy system, sometimes you'll also encounter an unbelievable amount of data. This might be an opportunity to apply big data techniques to really leveraging the value of the data that's there. So finding new opportunities, finding new efficiencies, depending on the market that you're in, it might also be a way to lower fraud and payments that should be made.
One thing I'd like to touch upon before we move to the next slide is regarding the compliance and the governance, and going back to my original point that, you know, I mean, I doubt that anybody listening to this webinar outside of TopCoder has ever thought of utilizing contests and challenges as a way to tackle compliance and governance issues. You know, we're talking about, you know, in many cases there's mandates. We're talking about personal and private information within healthcare. We're talking about accessibility, Section 508. You know, and one thing that we found is that utilizing contests to ensure compliance and ensure governance is extremely effective, and it's certainly outside of the box thinking. It's a way of using an existing community, an existing workflow, an existing platform in a way that's frankly liberating, liberating to those to organizations that are running those competitions. And so, you know, part of the point of this exercise is to think about those, you know, think about ways in which contests and challenges can be utilized outside of what you're used to thinking about contests and challenges being utilized for.
Very cool. And for anybody else who does visit the TopCoder blog as well, just as a transition note, we did a piece on that a bit ago. I think it was entitled Digital Bug Hunts via Open Innovation, and it was really about Section 508 compliance and how they're using bug races and bug hunts to use a massively parallel community to basically do it faster, to find all these little bugs that are you know, mucking up a system and getting to them faster, identifying them, and working through what is a traditional compliance issue, but doing it in a brand new way. So if anybody wanted to go check that out, just search the TopCoder blog. If you put in bug hunts or Open Innovation bug hunts, you'll probably find that article. We'll point you to it too. So moving on to some of the methods of modernization. Andy, when you spoke about this recently at the TopCoder Roadshow, I thought this part was really, really cool because starting at the top here, I love the idea of that traditionally someone would just say, yeah, well, somebody out there, we can go find this person, and if we only post a big enough prize, if we only put a big enough pool of money out there, that person's going to come out of the woodworks. Can you kind of give us why that might not be the best approach?
Sure. It's about bottlenecks. So it's about how to use a large community that isn't just a crowd of people, but a community who come together and learn from each other and do things. So with almost 500,000 developers and technologists, you think someone out there is going to know Ada, someone's going to know APL, someone's going to know Fortran, and I'll be able to get that person and bring them in, and they'll take that old hammer of theirs and apply it to my nail. That's true. That actually happens. We've seen it happen, and in some cases that might be an appropriate thing to do. But the problem is, in the end, if you find, say, 5 great programmers on a legacy application out there, or legacy language, you're still limited by those 5 and their availability to work on your project in between shuffleboard and golf sessions. So why limit yourself to that? Another way of doing it, a more effective way of doing it, is to give that giant community a reason to learn what you have. One thing that TopCoder has done very effectively in its 12-year life here is to attract brilliant minds. So there's a large community of people who are very good at coding. They're great at problem solving. They're great at learning how to break down problems. And so what we found is that it's far more effective to appeal to that skill set than it is to appeal to a specific language domain. And so the one way of doing that on TopCoder is to give people a lot of opportunity to learn the skill that you need them to learn underneath this umbrella of the root skill that they already have mastered. So one of the things that is that really it becomes a maxim at TopCoder is that any platform, whether it's TopCoder in a set or any competitor that's out there is characterized by having a workflow that manages what you want to do, a pipeline of contests, and then a community to serve them. And what you'll find is, if you have the workflow and the pipeline, then the community will come. So, well, I'll articulate what we're all thinking. If you build it, you will come. So, to the maxims of modernization, then, we have 2 lessons that we try to apply to every game plan when we're working with modernization. One is that competitors will win through learning. They'll try to corner the market in your contests. And stakeholders, therefore, will succeed through teaching. So if you're able to provide enough contests and provide enough opportunities for somebody to learn, and you provide sufficient support to those contests, they'll learn it. And they'll want to learn it because it means they'll win more. So we'll go through a couple examples here in a moment where we talk about how those are actually applied. At a very high level, the way that you make this work is that you start very coarse-grained, let the community find its way, and then you build on that and double down on what people are really proving effective at and focus on that attention in the gaps. So as we said, iteration is everything. And TopCoder model is broken down specifically to iterate through the SDLC. So by using coarse-grained challenges, by posting a lot of opportunity, we can really scaffold the community and scaffold what it's learning. Outcomes of an early contest become input to a later contest, and it becomes captured in a knowledge base that supports the overall approach. This gives us that iterative approach to modernization.
And that's very nicely said there, Andy. And I think it just bears repeating in a 10-second nutshell that the 2 options are try and go find that needle in the haystack by putting out a ton of money, and yeah, you might get a few people to it that do have that certain skill set, or like you said, build a sub-community around it that can gain the skills, gain the knowledge because they see the pipeline of work there, and they're going to want to go master that because they see the opportunity to do so. They'll self-select, and once you have that, then you've got a real workable community that you can go back to and grow itself and really have a lot of success there. So thank you for breaking that down. I think it's great stuff. So we go into a challenge of another kind, which is, I think, a lot of times, whether it's modernization or even stuff on the front end of creativity or just software. We see this challenge quite a bit. So, Andy, you want to square this one up for the people?
Sure. If you have a mainframe system or what you consider a legacy app, it's probably legacy because it deals with such important data. So let's put 500,000 people in front of it and give them all access. Well, that usually elicits a predictable and very common response of, what? What exactly do you want to do, and do you think I'm mad? So it's helpful to talk about these things with respect to what other people are doing. It helps address the perception. And we can also speak more specifically about the active controls we take to protect that information. So this is probably what everyone is thinking at this point is, why ever would you do this? So let's go on and talk about who has done this and give a couple examples. And warning, we're about to get a little bit detailed here.
And I just want to say too, for when we do a TopCoder webinar like this, especially one of which is going to be this granular, we do want to put the meat on the bones for you there, because it's one thing to talk about how we approach this, and it's certainly another to showcase how we've actually executed. And so this part, the slides might get a little quote unquote uglier, and there might be a bit more bullets on there, but the meat is there, and I hope the audience out there really enjoys the kind of detail that we're about to go into here.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, when you're thinking about this kind of an effort, the objections that you're going to have, if you have objections, are going to be the same objections that this sort of a model has overcome many, many times. Objections about security, objections about access control, objections about private and proprietary information and how that's going to be shared with some of the solvers. And we've tackled that. We have processes in place for that. And so don't just discount this type of an innovation approach just because of initial objections that you have. And some of these slides that Andy's about to get into, we'll show you why that's the case.
Well said, Mike. All right, Andy, back over to you.
Okay, so let's address it with an obvious example here. Office of Personnel Management is a federal agency that reports to the president that is tasked with two things. One is managing the retirement profiles for all, the retirement accounts for all federal and civilian workers paid by the government, and it's also charged with investigations. But here we're dealing with just retirement. There's an application, or at least a feature, that OPM is legislated to provide, which is service credit deposit and redeposit. That is, if you leave government service or you leave a class of government service and then come back, depending on what you've contributed, you may be permitted to either cash out your retirement account or to begin recontributing to it and have it backdated to the time that you would have been contributing to it. So again, this is a legislated application. It manages retirement accounts. It's based on thousands of pages of legislation. It dates back to World War I in terms of policies it has to manage. And it is characterized by all the things that characterize a legacy system that needs to undergo modernization, including an extremely complicated management portfolio that involves two separate branches of the agency, several offices within those branches, and in total about 14 tactical stakeholders and 6 executive stakeholders. So just to sharpen the point a bit, this application and this agency are dealing with, and the data that we're modernizing, is managing the retirement plans for congressmen and women, senators, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, generals and admirals, Supreme Court justices, federal justices, and anyone who's paid by the government. A reasonably sensitive application. So a few quick facts. This is a .NET application that connects to an older mainframe system. There are 3 modules. The take-home for this is that each of those modules implement the same rules separately. So there are some distinctions between them and problems to manage between them. There is commented code, but there is no documentation. They uncovered some a few months into the project, but originally there was none. The challenge input is the raw source code for the 3 different modes, a suit, which is the statement objective that they need to work on, and time from a technical writer. The goal was to replace this thing. to do so with a modern rules-based approach, and to also install support documentation that separates the roles of personnel who are monitoring compliance with legislative rules and those who are implementing those rules. So in short, don't allow the programmer, or don't require, neither require nor allow the programmer to read and interpret regulations and then implement it in the system. I'll move our presentation along a little bit here in the interest of time, but just to underscore that this isn't a carve it out and throw it over the wall type problem. This is a large bureaucracy of bureaucracies, and careful management of it is required on both their side and ours. One way that we're doing this is supporting it with 2 tracks. One track on TopCoder that is specifically tasked with decomposing the existing system, taking the source code and breaking it out into documentation and understanding exactly what rules are implemented there today. The second track of work is informed by the first and is to design the new system. One complication here is that the stakeholders of the system may not be aware of a lot of modern approaches. And so one important task that the community has to solve is how to educate stakeholders on what new approaches might exist. We are doing that with a tighter team to handle high-velocity feedback, supporting the members, and a steering committee to provide directive and executive feedback. Clinton, if you could hit the next slide, please. So how did we do the legacy decomposition? Because this obviously is where it all starts and where we understand what actually is complied with today and not legislatively. We required 19 contests over a span of about 3 months. We listed the game plan in advance and adjusted it as we learned after each contest. Each calculation that's in place today, all versions of those calculations across the 3 modes are now documented. How they operate are documented, and the kinds of business processes it supports from a permissions view are now also documented. The documentation was fine enough to allow us to, coupled with the various versions of code that we received, to instantiate a sanitized version of the application that resides on the cloud. So we've been able to rehydrate the app and to do so with completely made-up data, which means that the competitors are able to work interactively with the system. This reinforces some of the maxims that we had before. Because the game plan was listed, that's succeeding through teaching. It's teaching people what opportunities exist for them. The members are learning the data, and they're winning through learning. In this case, it's less of the language bar is lower, but the intricacies of OPM is higher. So where we are today is we also supported this with 7 recorded demos of users explaining what they did. And this was invaluable for our membership to help understand what business processes could also be changed to support better use of the application.